Hi, everyone. I am super excited about these speakers. I think that tonight's going to be a very interesting night where we can all learn little ways and big ways that we can contribute to making this planet a better place for our children, grandchildren, and hopefully humanity for years to come. So according to Aviva, she gave a quote on our speakers. And Aviva said that Ayn and Kathleen are motivated and passionate advocates working at the city and county level to advance innovative climate measures. Their work will take us into the modern era in terms of reducing the climate threats Laguna Beach and Orange County face. Our speakers will address how Laguna Beach and other cities can update and enforce climate regulations, where climate and social justice movements intersect, and what Laguna residents can do to make our town more sustainable. I thought that quote was really well spoken and kind of sums up the importance of this event. To talk a little bit about the speakers that you guys are going to be hearing from tonight, Dr. Treseder is a professor of biology at the University of California, Irvine. For 30 years, she has led an internationally recognized research program and educated the next generation of scientists. She is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Academy of Microbiology, and the Ecological Society of America. Dr. Treseder graduated from the University of Utah with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology with a minor in chemistry and obtained her PhD in Biological Sciences from Stanford University. She was awarded a postdoctorate at UC Riverside and was an assistant professor in the Department of Biology at the University of Pennsylvania before UCI. As an undergraduate, Dr. Treseder co-authored a research paper that was a cover story in Nature magazine. Since then, she has published more than 90 peer-reviewed scientific papers that have been cited over 19,000 times. Before becoming an environmental advocate, Ayn Craciun had 3 successful careers in corporate communications. In 2015, she learned that 3 children in her Irvine neighborhood of 1,700 homes had been diagnosed with brain tumors. Her passion for combating dangerous environmental impacts was born. Since then, she has successfully advocated for the city of Irvine's historic organic landscaping policy, which brought an end to Irvine's use of fossil fuel-based pesticides that harm human health and the environment. The policy was adopted by the city in February of 2016. Since then, Craciun has helped guide and served as an advisor to cities across the country seeking to create similar organic landscaping policies. In 2020, Irvine's policy was recognized by California EPA's Department of Pesticide Regulation for its achievement in reducing risk from pesticide use. In 2018, she turned her focus to the climate crisis and helped build a coalition of support to create the Irvine-led Orange County Power Authority, a locally operated electricity provider for Orange County cities, which launched in December 2020. That was a lot of words about 2 great people. I am way more excited to hear you guys speak and share your actual brains with us.
Thank you. All right. I'm so excited to be here. I'm very honored to be team presenting with Ayn. I'm so happy to have been working with her for the past few years, and I just try to keep up with her. So we'll be trading off one another. And then I also wanted to thank all of you. Thank you all for being here this evening. I see a lot of supporters here, a lot of people who have really helped bring renewable energy to Orange County, and it's so good to see all of you. And so I hope that you are able to take away what you need from this presentation. So can we please go to our first slides?
Yes, give me one moment.
No problem. Okay, so I really appreciate we had some discussions with your club leaders about what to talk about, and they emphasize really focusing a lot on what Laguna Beach can do to fight climate change. So we've structured our presentation around that. And I just want to start off with this picture, which is also my background. This is a picture that my husband and I took one of the first weeks of quarantine, you know, and everything was shut down and nobody was driving. This is from top of the world here. And I mean, you can see, look, I have never seen a view like this. It is so crystal clear. I felt like we could see forever. And I keep looking at this photo now, and it just gives me a vision of what we can experience every year. Not every day. We can experience this every day if we just change our behavior. It's all within reach. All right, we can do it. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so this is our roadmap for what we're going to be talking about for the presentation. So first, I'm going to talk about the state of the climate crisis and threats specifically to Laguna Beach. Then Ayn is going to take over and talk about why should we focus on local climate action? What can we do? And how did we get here? Then we'll have a break for Q&A. And then I'll talk a bit about community choice energy, which is happening right now in Orange County. Ayn will take over, talk about climate action plans. And then I will talk a bit about climate justice, and we'll have another Q&A session. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, for the state of the climate crisis, if you wouldn't mind, please playing this video. The main thing that I want to highlight here is that climate change is happening right now. This isn't something that we're working on, sometime in the future. People are actually experiencing climate change, and they're really suffering for it. And so this is what gets me out of bed every day, which really keeps me working. So these are temperatures globally. Warmer colors indicate warmer temperatures. Here we are running up to 2020. Would you mind please going to the next slide? Okay, so, one, please. There we go. Okay, perfect. So, okay. So these are temperatures above what used to be normal. Okay. The redder colors indicate warmer temperatures here that we are experiencing right now, all right, above average. So you can see here, there is almost no part of the globe that is exempt from warming right now, okay, including California. I also want to point out, so areas near the equator and near deserts, not too far off the equator, those places were already pretty warm, and the deserts were already pretty dry. There's warming happening right now, and that's affecting the people there. So if you go to near the equator, you see people who were having crop failures because their crops cannot grow in these new conditions. Right? We're also seeing diseases spread. Right? So there's malaria is a major disease in the world. It's starting to spread to more areas because it does better under warmer areas. We have yellow fever. We have the Zika virus. We have many diseases right now that are killing more people near the equator. Right? So when I'm talking about climate change, of course it's affecting us. We are relatively privileged right here. We have the option in many cases of moving to a new area if we need to, or fixing our homes or building seawalls. But a lot of these other places don't have that privilege. All right. So this is why, one of the reasons that I'm working so hard on this. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Also, I have to say, even Laguna Beach is going to be affected by climate change. Maybe you haven't seen a lot of effects just yet, but one of the things that we are expecting to happen is we're expecting to see a lot of sea level rise. And in fact, by the end of this century, we expect to see the ocean right off California rise 10 feet. Okay, so this just to show you what's going to happen to Laguna Beach within our lifetimes, many of us. Would you mind going to the next slide? Okay, so all that blue, okay, so yeah, all of this blue area here, this will be underwater, okay, by the end of this century. So just to give a little bit of a close-up, would you mind please going to the next slide? So that's a lot of downtown Laguna Beach, okay, a lot of the commercial area. And if you go to the next slide, please, just to give you an idea. So that's Whole Foods right there that I've circled. So basically, everything up until Whole Foods, we expect to be underwater by the end of this century. That's a major change to Laguna Beach. All right, can you go to the next slide too? Okay, now there's also some cliffs here by Main Beach and other parts of Laguna Beach. And you might think, well, they're safe because the cliffs should block the flooding from the 10 feet rise. But unfortunately, no. So what's going to happen is these storms, we're going to see stronger storms and stronger waves, and they're going to start hitting these cliffs. And we actually expect in Southern California to lose 100 to 150 feet of sea cliffs. That's going in from the ocean. So 100 to 150 feet in from the ocean. And these areas, if you go to the next slide, so I made my husband take me on date night to look at the structural integrity of these cliffs. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. Oh, one more. Yeah. Oh, okay. Right, there you go.
Sorry, I was having some trouble with the mouse here.
I understand how it goes. Okay, so I took him on date night. We scoped out these cliffs. They don't have a ton of structural integrity. I'll just say, you can look at it, they're kind of flaking off already. So if we have the ocean starting hitting that, like every day when there's a high tide, those cliffs are gonna go pretty fast. So this is something that is really gonna hit home in Laguna Beach. And if you go to the next slide, please. We're already starting to see some cliffs collapse. This is in Encinitas, not too far from us, and they had a cliff collapse, and unfortunately it caused a fatality. And so these are things that we're expecting to see more often and actually pretty soon. So definitely Laguna Beach has a stake in this, as well as many other places. Okay, so the next slide, please. All right, now, unfortunately, climate change is happening at a faster pace than we originally predicted. And in fact, we just had a new report come out from some climate change scientists who are looking at the timeline for climate action in California. And we had originally in California hoped to make really great inroads on reducing greenhouse gases by 2045. That was our target. But now these experts are saying that's not going to be fast enough. All right, we need to be a lot faster than that. In fact, they said in this report, California can and should align its climate goals with the most recent science. This entails dramatically accelerating its carbon neutrality and net negative emissions goal from 2045 to 2030. So this is really fast, okay? And what they mean by carbon neutrality is that we're not putting any extra greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And any greenhouse gases that we can't avoid putting in, they're gonna need to be offset by us growing trees or something else that will pull carbon out of the atmosphere. Okay, so that is very soon coming up. But I just want you to know, we can do it. We actually can do it. And I'm going to leave that to Ayn to talk about how we're going to do it. Okay, I'm just going to hand that off to her. But it is possible, so don't lose hope. Okay, and then can we go to the next slide? Okay, now it's Ayn's turn to tell us how to do it.
Thank you, Kathleen. Just to check in, how are we doing on time? We okay? How much time should I take for this next segment?
I think you're fine. We want to hear from you. So please.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for that very kind introduction, of course, for having me, and for Kathleen. Such an honor to work with Kathleen, such a respected researcher. I want to add that I'm now a policy advocate with Climate Action Campaign because I'm a mom and I care very deeply about climate, and I see it as the existential threat that it is. As Kathleen was making the case, I think very clearly, we really cannot overstate the trouble that we are in on climate. Can you hear me okay? Somebody says my sound is low.
You're a little bit low. You're not as loud as Kathleen for sure, and probably not me, but I talk loud. But if you could.
Okay, I'll type up. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to rapidly achieve zero carbon to stop the worst impacts. And Climate Action Campaign is a nonprofit. We have a simple mission, and that is to stop the climate crisis through local policy action. And at Climate Action Campaign, we have our 5 fights that tackle what we see as the biggest local drivers of the climate crisis. And we believe that focusing on these specific policy areas will be able to protect public health, improve our quality of life, create family sustaining jobs, and achieve racial and social justice, which is always at the center of our work. So next slide, please. So, so why local climate action? As we all sit here in Orange County, just as a practical matter, I think it makes sense to consider local action for cities that value that, because state and federal policy are subject, of course, to various political winds which cities are too, but that cities, have different forces at play. And then also, importantly, cities can act faster than those larger governments can in many cases. And then also, as I have here on the slide, some stats from the UN about cities and their emissions. And for all these reasons, that local governments can play a really fundamental role in reducing local emissions. Cities are major contributors to climate change. They take up less than 2% of the world's surface, but they consume 78% of the world's energy. And more than 60% of its greenhouse gas emissions. And in 2018, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its landmark report that you may have heard about, warning that to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis, we need to rapidly mobilize to slash emissions. And another major finding of the report was that the kind of urgent and unprecedented changes that we're going to need to meet this goal are affordable and they're feasible, but all we need is the political will to implement them. So yes, cities are important, and good news, from where I sit, your city is where you have the most power, more so than on a federal and state level. So next slide. Without stealing Kathleen's thunder, because she's going to talk about community choice energy, but I just want to offer this as an example of the local change that is possible, community choice energy, which is adopted in Irvine and 3 other Orange County cities last year. It's just a great example of the kind of systemic change that we need and that is possible locally. So next slide. This is the emissions impact. If you're thinking about, I care about climate, I'm worried about these effects, what can I do individually? Of course, climate change is a big problem. It needs big solutions, and we're out of time for the kind of small scale thinking that has been promoted in the past. But big actions like community choice can change emissions for every energy user in an entire city. And this graphic shows the results from the City of Irvine study showing their emissions reductions. And so I just plug that in along with the findings of the Climate Mitigation Gap study, which is widely cited and was published in 2017 in Environmental Research Letters. And that showed the impact of these other individual climate actions. They found that number 1 was to have 1 fewer child, and then we had live car free. And so it was just quantifying the effects of various options that were available to people who wanted to try and take an individual climate action. But if you look at this and note that 360,000 tons of CO2 per year will be eliminated with the implementation of renewable energy in Irvine that will happen from community choice energy. It's like taking 78,000 cars off the road. That's almost 1 for every household in Irvine. And this is going to happen next year. It's not going to happen in 2030 or 2045 or 2050. It's going to happen next year. So this is why we have to have it. And it's just the biggest hammer that we have in our climate tool belt. Now, this shows the impact if one person were to do it by themselves, which you won't do, and which didn't happen in Irvine. In fairness, like the number of people who worked on it, the number of people who came to meetings and sent letters over time, it maybe was 200 people, including everyone who showed up at all the meetings and sent letters, I think. But it wasn't, as far as the people who worked on it, for the most part, it was not that many. It probably wasn't the people who focused on it and put a lot of time in, it was probably less than 10. So it just, as we're thinking about what we want to do and how we want to try to make an impact, I think it's just important to consider the data. And And this is, I think I always tell people that they have a superpower when it comes to their local government, because people live in bodies which occupy space in physical specific geographic areas, and your location endows you with superpowers in that space if you're willing to show up and go to your council meeting and make a credible case and show the data and be persistent. Then it's just much more likely that you'll be able to make a change on a policy like this than you will ever be able to on a state or federal policy. So yes, so this is why we need local climate action. So next slide, please. So speaking of showing up at your city council meeting and making the case for the climate cause, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of electricity regulation and how we got here. A lot of conversations about electricity policy and climate are sort of ahistorical, but I think it's important to put things into context. So just a brief timeline. So by the early 1900s, of course, we had the invention of electricity, and then by the early 1900s, monopolies were seen as a dangerous economic entities that would potentially use their market power to charge high and unfair prices. So public utility commissions became the institutional venue of choice to ensure that utilities were able to recoup their costs without abusing their monopoly power. And here's the important part. In return for that right to operate as a monopoly, private utilities were required to have state oversight to ensure reliable and cheap power to everyone. So it's surprising to note here that CPUC and SoCal Edison have been around for more than 100 years. Of course, humans have this sort of built-in resistance to change, so maybe we shouldn't be surprised that although a lot of things have changed in the last 100 years, last century, electricity regulation maybe hasn't changed very much in some ways. So PUCs remain sort of quasi-judicial, quasi-legislative regulatory institutions led by a group of commissioners. Unfortunately, PUCs' interests are often, that's public utility commissions, interests are often wrapped up with the investor-owned utilities because the actions that diminish the monopoly power of investor-owned utilities are seen as sort of diminishing the influence of the Public Utilities Commission. So I think there is definitely a case to be made that this is not working out the way it was intended. And so it's just food for thought. So next slide. So that was kind of how it started. Here's how it's going. This monopoly arrangement has worked out pretty well for SoCal Edison and for the other investor-owned utilities. In the case of SoCal Edison, it's shocking when you look it up, but they have actually delivered a dividend or stock split every quarter since Q2 of 1910. And anyone who's ever, 1910, so that's more than 110 years ago, every single quarter. So, so anyone who has a 401k, can appreciate that, I guess, but we just have to consider what is in the best interest of a city when we are considering, this kind of history. And I just have to add one more thing about CCE, Community Choice Energy, that the funds that currently pay for these shareholder dividends under Community Choice instead go to pay for programs that reduce energy use or make energy more affordable or otherwise benefit the community. So next slide. A bit more about investor-owned utilities, and I think there's a case to be made that they have a conflict of interest. You can see here SoCal or SDG&E's rates are that top red line. If you live in an SDG&E area in South Laguna, you have the distinction of having the highest electric rates in the continental United States. And so these rates are problematic for people for a lot of people, and they present affordability issues. And according to some data presented by the Public Utilities Commission in February, more than 300,000 California households owe more than $1,000 in past due bills. And of that number, almost 100,000 owe more than $200,000 for their electric bill. So as we think about like justice and fairness and who's had a seat at the table in making policy decisions in the past and who's paying the price and who stands to suffer as we see increasing energy needs going forward. It's just important to keep this kind of information in mind. Next slide. So also, to the same point, this sort of profit taking is even more troubling, I think, when you consider that investor-owned utilities have used their privileged position over time to deny and delay climate action and climate policy. So electric utilities knew more than 50 years ago about the potential consequences of their choices and their energy mixes, but they didn't choose to act. Instead, they tried to discredit climate science, and they continued to delay action on policies that would have helped at that time. So it's not, doesn't make anyone happy to think about this, but these are the facts. So next slide. This was to the point of delay and disinformation. This was a very successful marketing campaign that fossil fuel company, British Petroleum, created in 2004, this idea of the carbon footprint. It was an invention of the fossil fuel industry. So before you go, and that was deliberate to distract from their actions and how they were contributing to the climate crisis. So this is just all important information to keep in mind. Next slide. So from the 1980s onward, private utilities, in addition to fossil fuel companies, but private utilities organized through their industry association actively spread this kind of climate denial. And this is an example from 1991 of the Edison Electric Institute, which represents all investor-owned utilities in the US, and some of their disinformation and denial of climate science, which continued for 3 decades. And then as recently as 2017, actually, the CEO of Southern Company, which is a private utility based in Georgia, who was chair of the Edison Electric Institute at the time, claimed that climate change had been happening for millennia and that human emissions were not the issue. So these kinds of actions continue, and actually they continue today. There's a bill in the Assembly or in the Senate, in the California Senate, to basically shut down the benefits of net energy metering and rooftop solar. So this kind of behavior is not over, and it's just important. It's just, this is how we got here. So we have to confront these facts. So next slide. This slide compares revenues for 2 leading renewables industry trade groups and the Edison Electric Institute, which is that trade group that created that ad in the last slide I showed you. And so you can kind of see that renewable energy advocates are really small fledgling actors compared to these large private utilities that are getting guaranteed profits from the state that they're using to maintain the status quo. And so we shouldn't be surprised to learn that with this complete lack of symmetry and resources, that utilities have often won their policy battles against climate policy, which is how we find ourselves in the existential crisis that we are in today. So this is why we need to take action on the kind of high impact climate solutions like community trace energy and climate action plans, which Kathleen will tell you a little bit more about now after we have our Q&A, I believe.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can look at the chat and see any questions that folks have. I've not been keeping up as our presenters are presenting because I was too immersed in their fantastic discussion. I'll first pull from a question that we got in advance of our meeting and from an attendee, and that is relevant to what you were just discussing, Ayn, which is that state Assembly or Senate bill that is revising the structure for net energy metering. I believe that our Democratic Club just put out a statement about it. So folks were curious to hear more of your take on it. They ask, essentially, what are your thoughts on that bill, and what can we do as meeting attendees and members of this club to fight against that bill at the state level?
Well, I know that it was scheduled for a vote today, but it was pulled from the floor by the sponsor because she wasn't sure she was going to have the votes. Lorena Gonzalez, who is really acting at the behest of unions in this case, and of the electric utility or utilities. And so basically this bill is really insidious, because in the name of sort of racial equity, they are saying that they need to remove net metering payments or radically reduce them because they disproportionately benefit white or affluent people, and that you know, communities of color are paying the price for this. That's sort of the narrative that they've put around that. But it's not true. And it's really interesting how the electric utilities show up for equity when it serves them, and that they have this long history of citing power plants, you know, in communities of color, and, you know, all these egregious actions that have harmed those communities. But when it benefits them, they decide to take their part. But that it's not even true. There are many reasons why there's a disparity in the distribution of rooftop solar. And, you know, we can look at, you know, do people of color have the kind of credit that they need to, because of, you know, historic inequities? Do they have, you know, do they have the money sitting around to buy rooftop solar? So there's kind of this false narrative at play there that the electric utilities are promoting. So Climate Action Campaign is urging a no vote, and we think we need more solar than ever now, and that we should find ways to help communities of color get more rooftop solar, rather than taking it away from people who rent, actually people who are leasing their panels, who maybe didn't have the funds up front to buy their panels, are going to suffer the most from this bill if it's passed. So it's not over. I would encourage all of you to contact your assembly members and your state senators, actually, if it should go before appropriations next. So we definitely need to stop it. Thank you for the question.
Sure thing. We have some other questions that were sent in via email, but I think they might serve us best at the end of your presentation.
I called Connie's office today, so I can say that she has not decided yet. And they took down my comments and said they were keeping a log of everybody who called. So they will note your call if you if you call in. So.
Yeah, so a great action item for all of us. The board has been calling Connie's office, and we'd encourage others to do the same, and are glad to have Ayn's endorsement of that action as well.
AB 1139, someone asked, AB 1139.
Yeah, thank you. And Alex, if you can drop that in the chat, just so folks have it. If there aren't any other questions, and I'm not seeing any in chat, I'll save our emailed questions for the end of the presentation, and we can move into hearing more about what Laguna Beach can do to combat this crisis. Let me get back into screen sharing mode. One sec, folks. Sorry about this.
See in the chat, there's a discussion about gas-powered leaf blowers, and I hate them. I really do. I've been trying to teach my classes, and they emit a lot of greenhouse gases.
They're a greater source of emissions in California now than all the cars in California.
Yeah, it is amazing. It really adds up. But all right, let's go back to the slides. I don't want to delay. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about community choice energy. So first of all, I want to thank Councilmember Weiss for really looking seriously into this program for Laguna Beach. And so I'll tell you about it. It's a great opportunity for cities to convert to 100% renewable energy very quickly, within a couple of years after they've decided to adopt it. Okay, so community choice energy is simply a program that the state of California allows cities, if they want to, they can vote to convert to community choice energy instead of being forced to buy power from their local monopoly, okay, from SoCal Edison or SDG&E, depending on where you live. So basically, it's an alternative to these investor-owned utilities that Ayn's been talking about. So a community choice energy, what a city can do, once it decides to start the program, it can buy energy from sources that it decides on. All right, we're literally taking our power back. Okay, so if you want to, you can buy energy from renewable energy distributors. So you can buy it from solar farms, from wind farms, from geothermal farms, and so forth, all right? So you decide what energy you buy. Then the utility delivers that energy from the provider to the customers, all right? They provide the same sort of service that they always have in delivering that energy. It doesn't change. They do get paid a fee for it. So they're in business, they've got their business going. Then you get this energy in Laguna Beach that you can be assured is like 100% renewable energy if that's what you've asked for, if that's what the city has contracted with. This means that you don't have to buy solar panels yourself, all right? You can get 100% renewable energy from a solar farm elsewhere that will be transported to you. Okay. Now, so this is great because first of all, you can go renewable very quickly. Second, you can end up saving money. Now, it depends a lot on the circumstances of your city and so forth. But in general, one of the things I've learned, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, before I get into that. Go ahead, please go to the next slide. Okay, so I also want to emphasize that community choice energy is in the California Democratic Party platform, right? Advocating for it. So in the platform, it says, supporting energy democracy and community choice energy programs to transition California to locally sourced clean power that will provide green jobs. Okay, so if we're getting power from our own providers, we can actually encourage solar farms or wind farms or things to establish near our communities, and then that will provide green jobs. Actually, there are local. Okay, go to the next slide, please. Okay, one of the things I was so surprised at when I started advocating for renewable energy is actually cheaper than fossil fuel energy now. Right? The technology has really advanced a lot. We especially have a lot of renewable energy in California because we have so much sunlight. It's cheaper than fossil fuels. So this means that for many communities, if they switch to renewable energy, they actually save money. Right, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, and in fact, we have a new community choice energy program in Orange County. I mentioned it earlier. It's called OC Power Authority, and it was established by Irvine, Fullerton, Huntington Beach, and Buena Park. It's going to go online. We're going to start using renewable energy starting September of next year. We expect that we'll be making a fair bit of money in this program. And that's, again, because there's renewable energy is cheaper and we're not sending money to investors. All right, here on this graph on this slide, showing the projected revenue for these programs for OC Power Authority by year. And you can see that by 2030, we're getting up to almost $60 million a year. That's per year. Okay, now this revenue, the state requires these programs to invest that revenue in energy programs. So what we can do is take that money and invest it in all sorts of other ways that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. All right, so we have cars out there. These cars are, a lot of them, if they're gasoline fuel cars, releasing greenhouse gases and pollution. What we can do is take some of that money and make deals with car dealerships in the area to subsidize when people buy electric vehicles. They can buy them for cheaper. There are community choice energy programs elsewhere in California where you can go to a car dealer. If you're a customer of community choice energy, you can buy an electric vehicle for $9,000, right? So this means now all of a sudden the electric vehicles are accessible to people even who don't make a whole lot of money or who might not even have a way of driving themselves around. We can also invest in charging stations. We can put charging stations in condominiums or apartments or other places where people don't have charging stations now, right? This will allow them to have electric vehicles. We can even have free charging in different places. This will pay for a lot. It'll also pay for green public transportation, right? So this has a lot of advantages for our communities. All right, can we please go to the next slide? And we can use some of that revenue in climate action plans, and Ayn will take it from here.
Thank you, Kathleen. So I love community choice energy. So I don't know, it's a toss up what's my favorite, community choice energy or climate action plan, but I do love a climate action plan too. So once you get your community choice energy program all rolled up, the Laguna Beach can also turn its attention to a climate action plan. And here's just have a couple slides talking through what it is and how it works and best practices. So climate action plan is a long range planning document, and it's they help sort of quantify for a local government their current greenhouse gas emissions levels. They identify targets, target levels to which they plan to reduce their emissions and chart the strategies that will enable the local government to reduce their community-wide emissions to their target levels. And they do take into consideration how state and federal policies will impact local efforts to reach their emissions reductions targets. Interestingly, there are currently 0 Orange County cities that have a meaningful climate action plan. And by meaningful, I mean legally binding and enforceable under CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act, although Irvine is working on it right now, and they are scheduled to vote on approving a vendor to implement their climate action plan, or really to create it, and then implementation will be, over a period of years, long range plan, of course, on June 22nd. So it would be really fantastic if Laguna Beach could join Irvine in setting an example for other Orange County cities and having a meaningful climate action plan. So on the next slide, I have a little bit more information about the emissions reductions categories and the things that are addressed in a climate action plan. They will focus on strategies that help reduce emissions from a few categories. Energy, of course, and that is usually, community choice energy will get you a lot of the way there in terms of energy. And then there's transportation and land use, and then water, solid water, wastewater, and it sort of lays out the plans for implementation and reporting also, which is very important. In the next slide, I have best practices that we look for in a climate action plan. So as a long range planning, I know this is a lot, I'm sorry, there's a lot on this slide. As a long range sort of document, a climate action plan's horizon should extend through at least 2045. Other cities in California, including Los Angeles and Santa Monica, are already planning for this goal. And they're showing in doing so that planning for carbon neutrality is not only necessary, but it is achievable today. The California Environmental Quality Act mandates that all state and local agencies must adopt enforceable measures to mitigate the expected greenhouse gas impacts of its general plan. So that means, any planned housing, housing is a primary element that you look for, and that drives the initiatives in a climate action plan. So in fact, the courts struck down a San Diego climate action plan that did not extend past 2020. So that goes back to sort of the planning horizon, that it needs to be a long range plan. And so for the CAP to function meaningfully as a roadmap to its reduction target, the measures in the plan must be enforceable, which means they have to be specific and unambiguous, and they have to contain clear requirements, and any voluntary measures violate the CEQA guidelines and make it, subject to legal review, which is not what you want. So that enforceable, specific element is very important. Community choice energy is really the only viable pathway to reaching 100% clean energy at the local level. So we always advocate for community choice energy in a climate action plan. Also building electrification, this part about eliminating building emissions. Even as cities achieve 100% clean energy through community choice, natural gas actually remains the third most significant source of emissions in cities. So in order to fully transition away from fossil fuels, we really have to reduce and ultimately eliminate natural gas consumption. Natural gas, it's interesting, it's sort of a euphemism, and I would like to have everyone know that natural gas, so-called natural gas, is actually 95 to 98% methane, which Kathleen could tell you is a very powerful fossil fuel, and is a major contributor to climate change, and is also terrible for your health. All the things, all the other additives that are in it, and probably the methane itself is really bad for your health, especially if you have asthma. So building electrification is important. Mode share, it says here, set mode share targets for biking, walking, and transit. Mode share refers to how we shift people away from driving and towards biking, walking, and transit. So we recommend setting ambitious targets for mode share and incorporating those targets into the city's strategic active transportation plan. For example, the city of San Diego states its goal as achieve mass transit mode share of 12% by 2020 and 25% by 2035 in transit priority areas. So very specific numbers there. And then it has similar targets for bicycle target and walking commuter mode share also. Let's see, smart growth. Smart growth is land use policy, basically, and that these policies are essential to supporting commuters' ability to choose non-car transportation. And so with smart growth, we recommend dense development located near transit, walking and biking infrastructure, and affordable housing, or affordable urban housing, can enable people to use non-car transportation rather than depending on a car for daily commutes, which brings a lot of co-benefits. In terms of equity, the Climate Action Plan should explicitly outline how it will implement the environmental justice section of the general plan, which is, of course, a guiding document for the city. And we also recommend that the development and implementation of this section take place in consultation with a diverse set of stakeholders from the most impacted areas of the city's communities. And that is, like a community task force, which can help guide the plan. Also, we advise a commitment to zero waste, because waste decaying in landfills emits methane, which again is a potent greenhouse gas. So the CAP should achieve zero waste through strategies like eliminating single-use materials, which Laguna Beach has a head start on, which is great, composting and capturing landfill gas. And we recommend adopting a zero waste policy that commits to 100% waste diversion by 2035. But with those updated science numbers that Kathleen was talking about, unfortunately, a lot of these targets are going to have to be accelerated to 2030 to be in line with the most recent climate science. In terms of a city's municipal fleet, we recommend electrifying a city's municipal vehicle fleet. And so the CAP should include strategies to promote zero emission vehicles and convert this municipal fleet to zero emission vehicles by 2030. We recommend that the CAPs exclusively commit to zero emission vehicles and not to hybrid vehicles, which probably exist to some degree already in the city fleet. We also recommend tree canopy targets, because tree canopies can sequester carbon, and they can also protect people from extreme heat events and some of these other effects of climate change. The city of San Diego's CAP includes a tree canopy target of 35%, which we consider a good number. And then, of course, finally, administration and staffing. It's really not feasible to implement a CAP without at least one dedicated CAP administrator to coordinate and track the implementation efforts. So the CAP should call for one at least full-time CAP administrator, and that position should be filled within the first 6 months after the adoption of the plan. And then the city may need to bring on additional staff to seek grants to help fund implementation of the CAP. I'm not sure for a city of Laguna Beach's size what exactly that staffing would look like, but that is what we usually recommend. And on to the next slide. Climate Action Campaign publishes a scorecard, report card on climate action plans in the San Diego region. We have for the last several years. Of course, I'm pretty new in Orange County. I'm new to Climate Action Campaign. As an employee, I've been volunteering for a while, but there are just two of us working for Climate Action Campaign in Orange County. So this is something I would like to see. Of course, we don't have any real climate action plans right now, any really meaningful ones to look at. But as soon as we do, we can add those to the report card and look forward to reporting on a Laguna Beach climate action plan in the report card. So next, I think Kathleen is going to talk to us a little bit about environmental justice next.
All right, thank you. I just want to mention, I saw Mayor Pro Tem Kemp put a comment in the chat, and I just want to mention that she has been an amazing advocate for community choice energy as well for Laguna Beach, so thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about environmental justice. So environmental justice is just the idea that the harmful effects of pollution and climate change and other things are disproportionately felt by disadvantaged communities. And it's simply not fair. It's not fair. A lot of times the people who are generating the pollution or the greenhouse gases are not the ones that are affected most strongly. All right, so we do have communities in Orange County that are experiencing deleterious effects of the environment. And here is a map that is showing, environmental harm that is being experienced by different areas in Orange County. The redder the colors, the more environmental harm there is, especially for people's health. All right, so Laguna Beach, I hope that you can find it down there. You can see Laguna Beach is doing great. I mean, it's green here. You're not really experiencing a lot of pollution or other things like that are harmful to you. But instead, we have more the inland communities that are experiencing that. And they're not the ones who are making the pollution. They're not. So can you go to the next slide, please? There's this video will just show, okay, so these are winds on a typical day in Orange County. I hope you can see those little lines that are moving. You can see them moving across Orange County. Basically, the winds are moving from the ocean inland. And you can see, if you can find Laguna Beach, we get nice, clean ocean breezes in Laguna Beach. And all the pollution that fossil fuel cars are making gets blown inland and is breathed by people in Riverside and San Bernardino and Santa Ana. And they're the ones who experience the asthma. They've had much higher rates of COVID mortality and hospitalization, in part because their lungs are already damaged by the pollution that they're breathing. So even though, in Irvine and other places like Laguna Beach, we don't necessarily walk around in the smog, it's because mostly these things do not respect city boundaries. They move all over. And so one of the things that I try to do in thinking about policy is just remembering that people who are experiencing these harmful effects of environmental change should be at the table. We should be listening to them and thinking about what they want and what ways that we can help them offset these harms. It's just the right thing to do. There are many other reasons to do it as well, but it's just the right thing to do. It's the fair thing to do. And these are our neighbors. And so this is something that I really appreciate. We have a lot of cities who are already working together. I know that city council members in Laguna Beach are talking to other cities, and we can work together to really think about this larger community. Okay, and then the next slide, please. Yeah, and it's just like, yeah, we have a lot of power as individuals. We can make calls. We can advocate for community choice energy. We can advocate or fight against bills as necessary. And we actually, there are many people. There's a ton of people on this call here. There are many people all around Laguna Beach and Orange County. And altogether, we have a lot of power, and we actually can make the changes that we need. We have the tools and the willpower, and it's just a matter of organizing. All right, and so Ayn, I think you're going to take the next slide. Is that right? Oh, yes. Okay,
Okay.
I was going to tell us what to do. Right.
Yeah, so I just I love a to-do list. So I took the I presumed to make a to-do list for you guys in case you were interested. So from what I've seen, like if you want to get something done on climate, it's just like anything, you have to make a plan. You can't sit around and be sad about it or just think about it. You have to get into action, and it's very therapeutic too. So I recommend it from that perspective as well. So I would recommend, and I bet Kathleen would too, that you form a local climate action group, that you set a goal, something you want to work on, and then you just meet regularly and you hold each other accountable and you follow up. And I guarantee you it'll feel good, and you'll have ups and downs, and things will go well and sometimes they won't, but you'll make friends and you'll be working on something that you're proud of and that you will be happy to be remembered for. So that's you can't lose there, basically. I would invite you all to sign up for Climate Action Campaign OC Alerts. So when there's a big action or a meeting coming up, we can notify folks so that they can participate in important ways in the meeting. Also, there is an OC for Clean Power Facebook group. With about, I think we're over 300 members now. And so I post to it a lot, but I invite anybody who wants to post stuff about, climate and clean energy stuff that's going on in Orange County. There's also, and Linda, there are other people on the call also, and Kathleen who post to it too, but great to have more participation. There is a website with more information about community choice energy, in particular locally, and it's called occleanpower.org. I encourage you to go there. And then I took the liberty of inviting you to contact your city council members, knowing that Mayor Pro Tem Kempf and Councilmember Weiss are on the call today, but I think that we never get anything we don't ask for. So I'd encourage you all to write a letter to your city council asking them to bring 100% renewable energy and community choice to Laguna Beach. And there is a template. I have a link there and I can post it in the chat. And then I'd encourage you to support climate candidates, of which Kathleen is one, and support climate causes, of which Climate Action Campaign is one also, of course. So that's my to-do list. Anything to add, Kathleen? We can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I think that will keep everybody busy. So yeah, this is actually very effective. It has worked very well in many places in Orange County.
So I have my contact info here, and Jose, who's my collaborator at Climate Action Campaign, feel free to reach out to us. If you need help or have questions about any of the information that I've shared today. And then I think we have more time for Q&A also. Oh, there are some extra slides at the end, some extra visuals. But
Okay.
Question?
Yes, wonderful. Others, please join me in thanking Ayn and Kathleen with emojis and appreciation in the chat, as you've been doing all along.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Kathleen and Ayn, for just an incredible presentation. Everything I could have hoped for and more. And I'll just say on a personal note, I have had the privilege of working with both Ayn and Kathleen, and they're both just fantastic. And we're so lucky to have them with us tonight. So I caught a question earlier when we were talking about transportation electrification from Mary Clifford asking, can we require the Uber-like transportation model that Councilman Weiss discussed at the beginning of our meeting? Can we require those vehicles to be electric vehicles?
That's interesting.
Maybe Mayor Pro Tem Weiss or
that's true.
Weiss will have
I'd be happy to answer that. I think what we have to do is recently we had an agenda bill that asked for a replacement to a police vehicle, and it's $85,000. So if Rivian or other companies can match that and provide a police vehicle or even lease one, we should look at that. And we should for every vehicle in our fleet, for police, for fire safety, lifeguards, even the water district. There's plenty of, the big trucks maybe we can't at this point, but every one of those should be replaced with electric vehicles where it's cost effective.
I agree.
Great, thanks, George. So Cheryl Procini asked, how do the presenters feel about the environmental impact of extracting minerals for the manufacturing of batteries for electric vehicles? And I'll throw in for other kinds of renewable and electric technologies.
It really is a problem. I wouldn't discount that ever. Like the good news is that battery technology is really improving a lot, very, very quickly. I mean, people know how important it is. So as I understand that there's a new generation of batteries for electric vehicles that are coming out now that are, I think, more lithium-based, which is a more common mineral. So we don't need to go in and really intensively mine it in places. It's not as harmful to extract. And my hope is that we can keep moving in that direction. I'm guessing that 10 years from now, we'll be looking back at the batteries we had now and just thinking that they are so out of date, for sure.
I would just add, of course, Kathleen knows what she's talking about there. And I wanted to add an article or a study from the Proceedings in the National Academy of Sciences that has found that they did an integrated life cycle assessment. So that means looking at, from origin, from mining all the way to, disposal or recycling or whatever happens with it at the end, that low carbon technologies and the electric vehicle batteries, this one doesn't apply to electric vehicle batteries, I'll have to find the other study, but that they are just as green as you would expect, and that they are more, they are not free of harms, but they have many fewer harms than the fossil fuels that are, currently so widely used. So there are significant benefits. Unfortunately, it's not without any harms, but it's a significant improvement. So let me take a moment and I'll find that other study too on batteries in particular, or electric vehicles.
Great. So I saw lots of support for a climate action plan in the chat, and Councilmember Weiss rightly raised that we do actually have a climate protection and action plan in the city of Laguna that Dr. Tom Osborne, who's on the call with us tonight, was instrumental in creating. Thank you, as always, Tom, for your leadership in the city on so many great initiatives. And can you talk a bit more about what our issue with the Climate Protection and Action Plan, though, is that it is not a legally binding document. Can you talk a bit more about why having a legally binding plan is important?
Yes. So what we see with plans that are not legally binding is that they adorn many shelves and many drawers, throughout the Western world, or, California. Basically, if it is not legally binding and if it doesn't have specific implementation measures, it doesn't get done. So that's why we need to have a very specific roadmap and very clear requirements that go with it. And that also that it can get thrown out by the courts, as has happened in other cases, for not complying with the California Environmental Quality Act, which is what requires cities to mitigate those greenhouse gases that are going to be caused by the planned development that's planned in the cities. And that they need to be legally enforceable. The climate action plan needs to be legally enforceable in order to be sort of, legitimate under CEQA.
Great. And then one final question in the chat, and I'll just note there was someone who sent in a question about the dredging of Newport Bay in advance of our meeting. I received your question and I will pass you along to Kathleen to answer it by email, just since it's a little to the side of our current discussion. So instead, for our final question of the night, Linda Kramer would like to know, can you share why joining OCPA is the best way to go when it comes to community choice energy, in your opinion?
Yeah, I favored joining OCPA. I mean, really any community choice energy program, I'm up for it. But OCPA, the reason that would be very useful is that they're nearby. The offices are going to be, just right around here. This means that if you have something that you care about, or some sort of emergency or something like that, you can just walk into the office. Like they're just right there. It's very accessible to your customers in Laguna Beach. So if they have something that they want to take care of, they know where to go. It's very fast. If we go with a community choice energy program up more north of here, they might not ever come down here. They might not really understand what's going on. In addition, OCPA, we can coordinate on these other programs, like installing EV chargers or having EV subsidies, and that could be very, very helpful. So we're not going in on it alone. And do you have anything that you would like to add?
So a community choice program should reflect the values and priorities of its community. Here comes my family to say hi. I'm still on my call. Thank you. So with that in mind, a community could join, a city, Laguna Beach could join another one, but would it share the same values? What are Laguna Beach's values? That is a good thing for the city to think about, for the council to think about and maybe articulate. And then you can see how that matches up with OC Power Authority and with others as well. So, for Climate Action Campaign, the most important thing is renewables. We want to get on 100% renewables, and you want to make sure you're joining a program that prioritizes that. The city of Irvine plans to offer 100% renewables. So I feel very confident, especially with Kathleen joining the council next year, hopefully, that will, it will definitely be possible. But so yeah, it's just going to be a lot easier to participate. And selfishly, I would appreciate having Laguna Beach at the table, being the kind of progressive city that you are, to provide the kind of vision and leadership that we will want to have on the board. We already have it. We have, Mayor Khan and Fred Young on the board, and some great folks, but who are committed to climate goals, I would say, all across the board. But I think having Laguna Beach on OCPA would just sort of strengthen that. And so, so that's what I'm hoping for.
All right. Thank you both so much, Ayn and Kathleen. That was fantastic presentation.